box, and also be on note that the webinar is being recorded, and we will put the recording on both BERNINA.com and on YouTube next week. It takes a while for the videos to be compiled from GoToWebinar. Okay, if you're viewing this webinar on an Apple computer, the screen that you see right now shows you where to go to get to the box on the right that will allow you to access the questions. Now, if you experience audiovisual issues, sometimes connectivity can be flaky. The simplest thing to do is to exit altogether, close your browser, and then reopen and re-enter the webinar. At most, it should take about 20-30 seconds. Okay, so welcome, good afternoon. My name is Sylvain. I've been working with BERNINA, oh boy, it'll be 25 years on January 1st. I used to be the webmaster for 18 years, and I've been with the education department now for 6 years. And I get to play with the toys. I sewed on a BERNINA for 3 years before I was hired by BERNINA. So as they say, I was a civilian once. And I fell in love with the machine well before I fell in love with the brand and, as part of my job. So what I'd like to do today is answer the questions, most of which have been, well, many of which have been submitted ahead of time, so that's cool. And I'll rattle them off as I go, and we'll cover as much as we can. So without further ado, let me start right at the top of the list. Actually, we just got this one a few minutes ago. In what position should we leave our presser foot and needle when we are finished for the day? Oh, that goes way back. Now, a lot of people still think that you should have the foot down, and lower the presser foot and stab the fabric, have the needle down in the fabric, and have a piece of fabric under there when you put your machine away. That is not true. You do not want to do that. It's actually risky. Good reason. Next time your machine is on, your BERNINA machine is on, try to move the needle bar. Just grab the needle bar and try to move it. You will not be able to. BERNINA has a rigidly guided needle bar. It is firmly controlled. When the machine is on and is done doing what we call the burp, like the rattling through the positions, you cannot move that yourself. But when the machine is off, and try it, turn off the machine, you can sway that needle bar left to right. If you put it down in the machine, you are at risk of, if somebody knocks against the bar, it's free to move. Well, free, it's not loose, but it will move, and it could graze your hook because there's nothing controlling it down there anymore. So you don't want to do that. The reason you see a piece of fabric, a swatch, stabbed with the foot down when you receive your machine from your technician, he or she is not telling you what to do. It's just they stabbed that sample so that, and you will pick up that machine, right? So my machine's in good hands the whole time. They stabbed the swatch so it would not get lost, because that's the last thing that they sewed when they service your machine, to show that it's sewing up to specs. That's the only reason you ever see this done, and it's only to preserve the sample and keep it with the machine. So the foot does not need to be down. It's not going to compress the spring and damage anything. You can leave the foot right up. On an 8 series or 7 series machine, most of those, the foot is up when you quit sewing, and it stays up there. Okay, so you don't have to do this, and definitely never store your machine with a needle down. That's a poker, a steel poker, flirting with your hook without being controlled. Don't like that. Okay, cool. Now, the next question we get a lot, and I put that one in there because I get that question all the time, and it's a good question. If I have dual feed on my machine, do I need a walking foot? The answer is 5% of the time, yes. So if you have a dual feed foot, at the back of the foot, you have this little cutout, and the dual feed bracket will get in there. And so what it does is, from the back of the foot, it helps with traction in combination with the back of the feed dog, but it's back here. So there's nothing where the needle is here, taking the stitch, before the needle where the fabric comes in, especially if there's a bit of loft, whether you're sewing on fluffy fabric like polar fleece or fleece period or a quilt sandwich, there's nothing controlling here. So sometimes you'll see a V forming up with a ripple because the traction is only applied to the back. The walking foot has a similar little pad here on the back. That is equivalent to the dual feed. Now, the walking foot does not put as much pressure against the feed dog as the dual feed does. So this little pad here, maybe only like 90% of what the dual feed does, but alone would have the same result. But the walking foot has these two long pads on the side, the little black pads here on both sides. So what it does, if this is where the stitch point is going to be, it grabs the fabric ahead at the stitch point and past the stitch point. So it maintains longitudinal. So before it says you're coming to the needle, you're taking the stitch, and then I'm going to keep control of you even behind the stitch. So you get perfect stitch control because you've tamed whatever layers were, whether it was plaids, whether it was a quilt sandwich, whether it was heavy duty stuff, you can control everything before, during, and after the stitch. That's why I came up with a slogan, if you want. The dual feed is 5 times the convenience. For a mug rug, for basic piecing, for basic sewing, for a table runner, it's fine. It usually will do the job just fine. You get into a wall quilt like mine, where I stitch in the ditch, and it's 20 pounds, you need a walking foot. So that's 5 times the performance, 5 times the convenience, 5 times the performance. So when it gets, when it gets a little heavier, you'll need the walking foot. The beauty is that you have both. And 95% of the time, you just slide your hand, it's engaged, you have the dual feed, but you have the solution when the going gets tough. So that's for that. We have, next question is, okay, I hear people adjusting their bobbin thread tension themselves. My tech tells me I shouldn't. Always listen to your tech. What do you have to say about that? You should not. I call it monkeying with the screw. The thing is that if you knew exactly how to bring it back, you might restore your bobbin case to its original tension. The reason you don't want to play with the original bobbin case is that that tension is calibrated at the factory with the sewing mechanism of your machine so that it will deliver top stitch quality and balanced tensions all the way to 1,000, 11, or 1,200 stitches a minute, depending on your model, right? If you play with that, you're throwing the whole equation off, and then it will become a guessing game. What you do, if you want to monkey with the screw, if you want to play with thread tensions because you want to play with funky threads, you want to do bobbin work and all that, there are basically several options available. But usually on the metal bobbin cases like Artista 200 or like a 3 series machine today, those metal bobbin cases, you can get a second one, put a dot of nail polish on the latch and play with it, right? That way, that one you can play all you want and make it work for what you need, but keep the calibrated one. On the Bernina hook, the 4, 5, 7 series, the black bobbin case is the default. Don't play with that one. The red one, the factory calls it the Red Devil, the red one has no tension spring. It is loose, open, free pass. You can do ribbon, heavy threads, yarns in there. So that's for bobbin work. It's great for that. The gold or yellow one, that one has higher tension for embroidery. So if you have the 2 presets, but if you just want to have the full range to play with, you could get a second black bobbin case, just mark it, so you can recognize it. And then you basically play with that one, but do not mess up the calibration for your regular bobbin case. You have a finely calibrated piece of machinery. It relies on that bobbin case being calibrated as well, okay? All right, then following to that, do I need a gold bobbin case for embroidery? And is that the only thing you use it for? Comes with the gray hair. Actually, I was the tester for the candidate prototype of the gold bobbin case. The shape of the bobbin case is the same as the black one, but the spring is tensioned differently. The blade that has a screw has more tension on it. And what I did is it was for the Bernina hook, so I took a maxi hoop and I loaded it, all kinds of stitching, triple, single, angles, satin stitch. I threw everything at it. And I sewed it with a regular bobbin case and with a high tension bobbin case. The regular bobbin case did perfectly fine about, I want to say 95% of the time, but some very dense areas with rapidly changing stitch angles, once in a while, you would see a little bit of the bobbin thread showing because the needle is set to one thing, one size, one design. And if you have, for instance, a plain fill that is filled up an area and you have satin stitch detailing on top, whether it's lettering or facial features and so on, it gets tenser, it gets denser, it gets tighter around the needle. And once in a while, if the needle is too tight, when it retracts and the take-up lever is trying to pull up that thread to finish the stitch, then it will squeeze the thread with it. And basically, if it's too tight and the bobbin thread does not have enough tension to compensate for that tightness, it will pull up too much with the bobbin thread and it will peak. Usually it'll be the needle dragging the bobbin thread up. So with the yellow bobbin case or the gold one, that went away. When I ran the same sample, none of the little peekaboos, there were not many, but none of those peekaboos in tighter areas failed to appear. It was perfect across the board. So I use mine, and there are other uses for it. If you have an old Bernina, like the CB hook, the traditional Bernina hook from olden days, the classic hook, there was a finger on the bobbin case, and there was a hole in it, finely polished hole, by the way, very well machined. And they tell you in the manual, like if you have an Aurora 440, they tell you to thread that little hole for embroidery. That's equivalent to the gold latch on your 200 bobbin case, the gold latch one with the pigtail, and it's equivalent to the gold bobbin case on the Bernina's hook on the 457 series today. So they would tell you to do this for embroidery, applique, satin stitch, buttonholes. So applications where you want the top thread to be pulled under so that your satin stitch from being like even like this will be a little more rounded because it went under. It's a decorative application. Same with the buttonholes. When you thread from the buttonhole where the knots don't form quite in the middle, you're less likely to cut them. And when the thread wraps underneath, this is usually polyester thread. It's abrasion resistant. It makes your buttonhole more durable. Same thing. So on my 790, my lone machine at work, I use the yellow bobbin case, the gold bobbin case for those same applications as well. It works great. All right. Good question. What makes a jeans needle stronger if it's the same size? On the label, it says, let's say 80, jeans 80 as a universal. So a needle is a pulled wire, right? So they pull it, and the sizing system in the US, the old system, like 12, 14, all that, that's wire gauge, right? The starting wire gauge. On the metric system, it's all on base 100. The metric system, you just move zeros around. It's nice and easy that way. So a size 70 needle is 70% the size of a reference 100 needle. We don't use 100s very much, but that is the reference needle on how they're basically made. So why is it stronger? The size of the needle, the shank, where the groove is on the front, that is actually skinnier if you look at the needle to where the eye is. The eye and the point. The point swells, then you have the eye, and then the needle tapers a little skinnier on the way to the flat, the thick part of the shank that inserts in the needle clamp where you screw it in, right? So what is different is that skinnier part above the eye, that is stronger and thicker on a jeans needle, and also on a top stitch needle. A little tip here. If I need to go to a jeans needle because it's sharp and it's stronger, and it gets really, really heavy, and if I ever need to go like a tote bag, when you box the bottom with sometimes 12 layers in that seam, that little triangle, you will cross very heavy layers, and sometimes there's bonding in there, like fusibles and stuff like that. So if a 90 is not going to cut it, if I have to go to 100 from jeans, I will go top stitch. Top stitch is strong, same. Sharp, same. Almost twice the height of the eye, which means the thread has that extra chance to flow freely and not have loopy stitches when you go through very heavy, tight material layers. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll have to come back to that. Yeah. Cool. All right. So somebody has an 820 and did not select the foot and activated the needle threader. It was a walking foot. Now, on the 8 series, if you have an 8 series, the presenter, when you trigger a threading by either starting to thread at the back or pressing the needle threader button, then the presenter comes down. We call it the lips because it has two parts that, you might say they look like plastic, right? The gray parts. And then there is a little retention mechanism inside. We call that the lips. And if you don't select the presser foot, like the walking foot, foot number 55, for instance, the leather roller foot, those have parts that are in the way, and for them to work properly, they need to be made that way. Well, they are incompatible with the needle threader, the automatic needle threader. So if you selected the foot on the machine, when you thread and you press go, the threader button, it will automatically thread the inside of the machine and it will stop there. The presenter will not come and smack the lips on the foot. A colleague of mine, I won't mention names, her name is Debbie. She's my favorite trainer. She did that not too long ago. She had to have her threader service. So if you smack the lips, if you did not specify on an automatic threader, remember it's automatic. It's supposed to do its motion on its own. but it doesn't know until you tell the machine what foot is on. So it cannot prevent the damage. So it's only a few feet, but what I do, my 7 and 8 series machines, I can select the pressure foot. And even if I put 1D, 1C, whatever, I tell the machine. That way I form the habit, and I don't have to think about it. It's every time. And it has saved so many needles. When I'm at night, I'm a morning person. At night, I make boo-boos. I make mistakes. At night, my seam ripper is likely to come out, right? So that is one insurance policy. And not only that, on screen, it lets you see what's going on. So if you put the foot, or if you selected the foot, then you know exactly what's going on before you sew. So that there's a visual advantage to that as well. So if that happens to you, two things. One, remember to select the foot in the future, and two, bring your machine in for service. If it seems jammed, maybe your tech can unjam it. It may be a repair at that point. If you select your foot, this will never happen, okay? All right, a question about the Q16, and actually it pertains to pretty much all machines. Because we have different hook systems, I have an Artista 200 at home. I have a 1260 Bernina CB hook. The rotary CB, I have a Bernina hook on the 790 and an 8 series hook on my 830 and my loaner 880, okay? I work with 4 hooks. When do you oil, right? When and where? No biggie, really. Everybody will tell you something different. Every other bobbin, well, a jumbo bobbin, and if you haven't sewn in a month, that oil is gone. We use the same oil now for all the machines. If you have an older Bernina, we used to use an oil that was called mobile oil, Velocite. Velocite means like velocity, like high spinning mechanisms, right? Velocite 10. 10 is viscosity. You know, 5W30, 5 is liquidy, 30 is thick, 10 is liquidy, right? And then nowadays, we've switched to Velocite 6, which is even thinner. The beauty of that is that that oil will evaporate and not gum up a machine. So those old gummed up machines from the 50s and 60s, because they use viscous oil, we don't get that problem. So you use the Velocite 6 for everything nowadays, but you will oil a little more often that way. What I do is every time I put a bobbin, I will put a small drop. I don't gush it, I just a little drop. And your machine will change sound. On a Bernina hook, there's 2 rockers that alternate in the back of the hook. You see them when the 2 holes in the hook, and they start ticking a little bit when they are ready for oil. And if you open the bobbin case, open the bobbin door, take the bobbin case out, keep the hook inside. If you see the 2 little oiling points, the little they look like felt pads. If they are gray, they're still wet. There's still oil in there. If they are white or whitish, they are dry. They're thirsty. Okay. So you'll hear it. I'm a fiend for the noise, the change of noise on the machine. So I take it from my mother that way. We could not make noises growing up. She knew what was going on. So I've inherited that. And my Artista 200 rotary hook, the hook gets a little metallic, clickety when it needs oil. Same thing. So I oil more often, less at a time, always goes. If you have not used your machine in a week or 2 weeks, the rule of thumb, the golden rule here is clean after you sew, oil before you sew. That way, it's always freshly oiled when you start, and you're good to go. And you clean after. If you clean and go on vacation and oil and go on vacation for 3 weeks, when you come back, that oil is gone. So that will take good care of you. So on the Q16, the question was, do I oil every day? If I sew about an hour a day, or how often? I would oil every day, a smaller drop. If you take your bobbin case out on any machine and you see it looks kind of wet, you're over oiling. Oil should not be like smearing all over like that. So that's a visual clue. And the Q16, it's a long arm machine. It has two stitch regulators. It goes fast. That machine will go to 2,000 stitches a minute. That's on average twice as fast as your regular sewing machine. So an hour on that is about 2 hours on a regular sewing machine. So I would oil every day. Just make sure, and if you see it's getting wet, you could either use a Q-tip and clean that up, and oil a little less, make your drops smaller. Okay. All right. So next we have a question about a Bernina 570 QE. Oh, so when the lady starts sewing, it does that little securing stitch before you start, and it creates a knot, and she doesn't want that. So I'm going to show you. We're going to switch to my simulator. I'm going to show you how you can turn that off. It's in the same place pretty much on all machines with a touch screen. So I have my 740 simulator up right now, but it's the same screen as, whoa, I didn't want that. I did not want that. Why is it showing me no? Why did that come up? Okay, my screen is blinking. The GoToWebinar is causing my computer screen to blink black and you just flicker at me. What? Okay, there you go. That's what I wanted. All right, so your screen will look very similar to this. The way to turn off it's called the tie off function at the beginning of a seam. Personally, I hold my threads when I sew. I learned that from my old machines, way back, mechanical machines. And you know what? My threads are always secure when I start. I can start off the fabric. I never get the needle thread looped under and whipped around the hook, right? So what I will do is go to settings. And this is the same on an 8 series, 7 series, 5 series. And it's a sewing function. And it's at the beginning here. Yours is turned on right now, the securing stitches when you start. If you forget what these things do, just touch the question mark on your screen. It will tell you, oh, you have a question. Touch what you want to find out about. It will tell you what that does. So that's at the beginning of every stitch. I don't like that function. I turn it off. If I want to secure, I will. But typically when I seam, I don't need to secure at the beginning. So you can turn it off here. You could turn it on at the beginning if you wanted to. Okay. Then that is for the securing stitches at the beginning. Let's go back to face cam. There you go. Okay. Okay, next question. At times I need to sew over a thick seam, especially when I'm doing home deck. So you start with medium heavy stuff and then you get a cross seam. Think hemming jeans, but with home deck fabrics, like upholstery type fabrics, for instance, or heavy curtain fabric, it gets chunky. So you have two choices. One is you can start with a medium-sized needle, and if it's only for a little bit like a hem or whatever, you need to eventually increase the size of the needle. You could do this, but I will usually do the needle that will cover the whole project if I can. It's different if you do a garment. If you do a denim shirt or overalls, you could do all the side seams with a regular size 80 denim needle, and it would be fine. But when you get to hemming, cross seams, and stuff like that, top stitching, you'll need a 90. Now, there is a secret, it's not a secret actually, there is the secret sauce, the Bernina formula. The way you do this, I want to grab a foot number 8, which would be, oops, I forgot to pull it out. Let me pull my foot number 8. Nope, sorry about that. I thought I'd pull all my feet out, but I forgot one. Okay, well, I'll just talk to it. So foot number 8 is a jeans foot. It's a straight stitch foot. If your machine lets you select the presser foot, select foot number 8 or 8D. I use 8D because I have a 7/8 series, right? But I use 8 on my 1260 Bernina. So foot number 8, select it if your machine will let you. It will restrict the needle to the center, no broken needles. Double down with the straight stitch plate. So straight stitch foot, straight stitch plate. The needle is being girded, is being governed as it goes down, so it cannot deflect, bend, and break. It will go through. So a 90 needle for hemming jeans with a jeans 90 needle, and a jeans needle is sharp, right? So it pierces well, it's stronger, and a 90 will go through. A universal needle will not hem jeans, just forget it. It will likely pop because the point is not sharp enough. So 90 needle for jeans, sharp, straight stitch plate, foot number 8. I don't even need I usually don't even have to use the height compensate, the leveling tool to make sure the foot stays level, because foot number 8 is designed to rise up on the lump, and then it will govern the needle from the back. The stitch plate will govern it from the front, and the needle will stay straight down. Now, if it gets thicker than that, upholstery fabric, and you're going to have cross seams, I would start with for upholstery fabric, I would probably use a top stitch. As I said before, it's stronger. And you may want to start with a 100. That way, it will cruise through everything. And that way you can just do your project. And if it's a stress area, I just helped a friend fix upholstery patio cushion covers. And the fabric had ripped. So when we mended, you can use actually a shorter than usual triple stitch, like a 2.5 stitch length triple stitch. That means that your thread will not pop because they're very strong. You don't want your stitches too far apart, because the more apart they are on heavy projects, the more stress each stitch will have to take. Now, if it's really thick, then you need to have a stitch that's long enough to feed enough thread across that seam. That's a given. So foot 8, straight stitch plate, a 90 or above sharp point needle, you're in business, okay? All right. Can you make buttonholes longer than what the automatic foot will allow? The automatic foot will allow a buttonhole that is 27 millimeters, 25 is an inch. So an inch and an eighth, just about, 29 with the, the bar tacks. So that's the max, right? That's great. But what if you want to do a 2 or 3 inch buttonhole so you can slit and pass a strap? You can actually weave fabric by doing this. Some people have done this with different materials. So then what you do is you use a regular buttonhole foot. Your machine should have come with a number 3 or 3C, depending if it's a 5.5 or 9 millimeter feed dog. And that is just basically the 2 channels to channel the beads. And it has the prong on the front so that you could cord it if you wanted to. If you're going to do very long buttonholes, and this mentions a big button, chances are there's going to be stress on this. So at that point, I would cord the buttonhole with the buttonhole cording, like a thin cord or a thick thread. Then you can actually reinforce your buttonhole that way. So the way you do this is, let's go back to the simulator. Okay, share my screen. Okay, so you select the buttonhole, and chances are it's going to be the regular buttonhole for for something like this. Then when you go, if you have an older machine, you can basically if you put number 3 or 3C, not automatic, just a plain vanilla buttonhole foot, basically you can just go through the buttonhole and do it. On the modern machines with visual interface like this, you can go to the eye functions, and then you have a couple of choices. Now this one here was where you could plug the length of the buttonhole, but that's only good with the automatic foot. So let's ignore that for now. This is the recording. That's a stitch counter, we call it. So you're going to go over the 2 inches, and let's pretend that's 55 stitches, something like that. It would record the number of stitches it took until you said stop, which is, you see the blinker, that's the quick reverse button. That would indicate, okay, stop recording. Then you could go backwards. It would go backwards to the beginning of the buttonhole, and then it would do the same stitch count on the second side. That way you would get your buttonhole, right? That works well on well-behaved fabrics. If you want to do any buttonhole that is not fully automatic under the foot, but even automatic under the foot, if the fabric is any questionable, like fuzzy, pile, stretchy, whatever, I use an embroidery stabilizer, a bit of temporary spray adhesive like 505. I put that under. It will hold the fabric against the foot. It will help hold everything together. And the feed dog, against the papery nature of the stabilizer, will give you perfect tracking of the length of the buttonhole. So that will help when you do buttonholes like this. Now, on some machines, there is a manual buttonhole, which is 6 steps. That is equivalent to the good old knob on the mechanical machines like the Bernina 1030 and something like the 930 from the 80s. You can actually reproduce buttonholes like this. So if you want to go super long, if your machine has a manual buttonhole, it would be a function down here on screen. Oh, this guy. When you do this, whoops, let me go back. So when you go to the manual buttonhole, do you see the steps? It will show you each step in a way. So you basically have complete command. You mark the beginning and the end. You just go and travel through. When you reach the mark, you step up to the next step in the buttonhole, and it will keep going until it's all done. So for extra long buttonholes, I like the plain buttonhole foot. I will probably use cording because it will give better structure and shape to the buttonhole and durability. And then I will use the manual buttonhole where available. Okay, so that's for the buttonholes. Let's go back to the face cam. Next, what do we have? It did that again. Okay, now I can minimize it. Yay. I don't need to see myself. All right, we're back on face cam. Okay, so what's the difference between sewing in reverse, like continuous reverse, and back stepping? So picture this: you walk in the snow, you're walking forward. If you are doing reverse sewing, it's equivalent to you turning 180 degrees on the spot and continuing walking back where you came from. But your footsteps may not match, the previous, the holes in the snow may not match you because you're just continuing the sequence of walking. and you're not necessarily matching the previous boot holes in the snow. Backstepping is picture that you walk to a point and you say, that's a prank that people would pull in the snow. I'm from Canada, we pull snow pranks, okay? So you get to the point where you want to stop, and then you walk backwards, you make sure that your boots hit the same holes, and when you go back to the source, it looks like you beamed up, like you disappeared right there, because the boots go one way, that's directional, and then it stops and you're not there, right? So backstepping, you're doing a vine. Let's say you're doing a little combination that's like a little vine with a leaf, the two leaves, then followed by the vine with the flower. Try to say that fast 3 times. So leaf, flower, leaf, flower, leaf, flower. You get to the end point. It's the end of a trim or something. You need to stop. You want to secure. If you happen to just finish the vine with the leaves, and you push the quick reverse or the continuous reverse, it will start in the reverse direction, but it will continue the sequence with the flower. So it will start basically stitching a flower over that leaf, because again, sequence continues, but reverses direction. If you do backstepping, it knows where it stopped. It was at stitch 17 in the leaf, vine. It says, okay, all right, so let's go backwards. It kicks the feed dog backwards. And it said, we're going to redo stitch 16, 15, 14, 13. It can remember 200 stitches like that, but you're not going to do that. So it allows you to backstep. It's really meant as a securing function, not as a decorative function. It's not a way to triple a stitch. Now, on new machines, 590, 770 QE plus, 790, 880 plus, no, 880, they either have a stitch designer or a triple stitch function. So you could preemptively triple the stitches before you sew them out. That would be the solution to making them thicker. Now, I said the backstepping can go 200 stitches. What happens though is when you reach the end point, it's when you reverse, even though the machine will move the feed dog and go exactly into the same XY coordinates for each stitch going backwards. It will backstep, but the conditions on the ground have changed. Your layers of fabric or fabric and stabilizer that came in virgin from the front when you sewed forward now have stitching bonding them together, and they have pull of thread in there, an extra thickness from the thread both above and below, a little more drag on the system, right? So when you start going backwards, the surface you are sewing on is not the same as what was. And there's no way for the machine to know what kind of fabric you have, how stretchy or not it is, did you have stabilizer down there, or do you have, what kind of thread are you using, that kind of thing. So it's good for a limited number of stitches. It will track very well, but you cannot count on that tracking perfectly over 200 stitches because the conditions have changed, and whatever change that is adds up. And so you'll see a discrepancy start to build as you go further back, because those change conditions keep adding on every inch of the way. All right. So backstepping, I don't use it very often, but for decorative purposes, it's very good. I tend to use a lock on the spot when I want to do that. When I want to do decorative stitches, but that's an old habit from my old machines, and I just made the new machines do what I had so the monkey would not have to be retrained. So whatever method works for you though is, stick to it. If it works for you, don't change it, okay? All right, next question. Oh yeah, this has been coming up of late. Will the BSR foot, the stitch regulator foot, be modified to work with ruler work? Well, I don't know. I'm not the product developer. My brain's not that big. This got a Red Dot Award. This is amazing. But here's how it works. This is the foot. This is the portion around the needle. So this is the sole, and that little loop there would be about equivalent to what your sole is on, let's say, a foot 72 adjustable, roller work foot, or 96 on a Q16. But on the Q machine, there are 2 of these upside down already in the stitch plate. So they don't have the issue, right? Here's the deal. Do you see that little black rectangle? That's actually a camera window. There's a black and white camera in here, and it takes thousands of pictures of flicks a second. It's like really, really fast. And it compares the pixels from one to the other, and then it knows that, oh, well, look, this group of pixels has moved this fast, so it can calculate the speed. There's a circuit board. There's a computer in here. There's software running inside this foot that talks to the machine and then tells the machine to slow down, speed up instantly, right? So the camera needs to be there, and it's right, it needs to be close to the foot to give you accurate tracking. And if you look at that, you cannot move that camera too far out and still have it on the foot. So for now, the answer is no. The future, if somebody had told me in 2001 or 2 or 3 that we would get something like this, we would have said, whoa, I don't think so. This is pretty amazing. And then in 2005, this showed up and we were blown away. So that, yeah, a black and white camera, there has to be room for it and it needs to be close. The reason, if you do a lot of stitch regulator work and you haven't tried a sit down or even on a table, you now have adjustable height tables for the long arms, like the Q16, Q16 Plus, or Q20, do yourself a favor. I have long arms. I tell people I put the long arm in quilting, and even the BSR on my 880, it works. And by the way, if you do BSR on a 790 and 880, don't have the machine like this in front of you. Turn the machine. I learned this from John Flynn. Hat to John. Turn the machine so it's facing you this way. Then you have more lateral freedom to do your quilt work, right? But I tend to move a little too fast. It seems jerky because when my long arms start moving, they go. The day I sat, back then we didn't have the Q16 yet. We had the Q20. When I sat down at a Q20 in a cabinet and I just moved the fabric, my brain went like, whoa, it was like butter. I could move fluidly, like it followed me because there are 2 stitch regulators. So you can go 2,200 stitches a minute. So from super slow to super fast, it stays with you. That's the advantage of the long arm. So the more BSR you do, the more you owe it to yourself to at least try it. Otherwise, for now, a little tip, if you want to do stitch regulation on the new machines, like pretty much in the last 10, 15 years, we have a speed slide control, right? I put mine at about 50, maybe 55% on average. And then when it's time to move with a ruler, with foot 72, this is the one I use, and now we have 72S with a slit, easier to use. I will floor the pedal. That way, my brain does not have to dedicate a channel to control the speed and maintain it. No, I can just, gradually, like in about 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds, floor it down. And then I just need to move my hands at a regular pace. I don't have to adjust or predict how fast is this going to go or not, and how do my hands have to follow with it. No, the speed is constant, and my hands just have to. So I only need to train half my brain to do this. Let the machine do consistent speed. I do. If I can, though, I will use a stitch regulator because that does it for me. Okay, so that's for the BSR and ruler work. We have a good question. My stitches get shorter when crossing seams while piecing a quilt top. I use foot 97D with a straight stitch plate. Good formula. So how can I fix this? Pretty straightforward. Tip my hat to my colleague, Debbie Ketchamani. She's the one who taught me this. I don't know if she invented it, but she's the one who taught it to me. So she gets full credit. So let's go to the simulator. Okay. It keeps doing this. It keeps bringing my face cam, my face screen on. Let me do this. All right. Whoops, now it's blinking. Okay, all right, we're there. So what you want to do, you have your straight stitch. By the way, if you piece regular quilting cotton, I'm going to show you what I do. Look at my stitch length. Whoops, one less. 1.75. That is, and I use a sharp needle, a size 70 jeans. Jeans is sharp, and you can piece the whole quilt with that. And the sharp needle will not hesitate when you go over those cross seams. Advantage number 1. Number 2, when you get to the cross seams, they can sometimes stretch away, or you get a shorter stitch because you get, it needs to climb over. That's because the presser foot pressure here is good for 2 regular simple layers, but on cross seams, you're hitting a lump. So what Debbie taught me is you reduce this by half. Now, your machines may have a different scale. 5 series, I believe the default is 70. And on a 7/8 series, the default is 50 because they have different height of a presser foot mechanism. The scale is different, but the net result on the fabric is the same. So just go with your own machine. Don't compare with another series, okay? So you reduce this by half and try that. You can actually change this as you sew, so you can repeat samples until you like it, then you close this. That will be this way. If you want, in the quilting menu, There are stitches here, for instance, not this one. There's a piecing stitch usually in here. This one doesn't have it. Some of them are a piecing stitch. What you can do, let me go back then. There's a piecing stitch here that you just calibrated in length, in pressure foot pressure. You could go to the personal program, put it in a folder, and let's say if quilting is my folder number 4, just save it there. It will always be there when you're done. If 80% of your sewing is what you do with piecing, there's another option. That's, courtesy of the BERNINA interface. So if you have your straight stitch, you like it here, you could go to the I function. And if you see that floppy drive here, that floppy disk, if you select this, this now becomes the default for that stitch every time you turn on the machine. So my machine, when I'm in the middle of making a quilt, will default to this stitch length. I may not, because mine are embroidered quilts, I don't need to reduce the pressure foot pressure, but whatever tweak I do, that becomes the standard, the default while I'm on that project. And when you're done, you can revoke that, override, and return the default of the stitch to the factory default. Okay, so you have options. That's for getting over those cross seams and not having the stitch get shorter is reducing a little bit the pressure foot pressure. What happens is that when you, let's go back to face cam, when you go over those cross seams, you are basically encountering double the layers, and they're knocking against each other. They want to drift and drag against each other. So as you get into the cross seam, the pressure builds against the foot. That and the fabric is doing a little bit of this under between the foot and the plate, because fabric is squishy, even though it doesn't look like it. And that will shorten your stitches. By reducing pressure foot pressure, you reduce that drag and that pressure put on the fabric, and it will keep cruising through. Okay. So thank you, Debbie. That has improved my piecing big time. All right, let's go. Let me go back to my questions. Okay. Can I turn off the hover feature on my 770 QE? You can turn it off and you can turn it on. So I will show you how that's done. There's basically 2 settings that you work with there. Let's see here. Yeah, so this lady just upgraded to a B770 QE Plus. So that way, let me show you how that works. To change the hover, on all the machines that do the hover, those are the machines that can lift the pressure foot themselves. So that would be like a 590 for sure, 770, 7 and 8 series for that matter. So that is the setting. So we'll go to the settings, the gears. And if you have a big screen machine, like a 7-inch screen machine, it'll be on the right-hand side, but you go there. It is a, oops, sorry, we need to do that, right? Okay, so you go to the settings, then it's a sewing setting. And then here, it has to do with the buttons. Like on the 8 series, it's a dedicated button, or the 7 series to raise and lower the foot, right? So when you go there, there are 2 places you go. First is whether you want to hover or not, and then how high a hover do you want. Let's do the hover first. Hover only works when your needle down function is active. Makes sense. You need to stab that fabric to control it if you're going to raise the foot. Otherwise, everything slides off and you stretch your thread out and you have lost your seam alignment, right? So once you activate the needle down function, the hover function can be put in service. So when you go there, you have 3 options. One is no hover. Number 2 is hover partial, like just above the fabric. And then the third one is full up hover, like bringing the foot all the way up. I've not used this very often, but I helped a friend sew on little logo patches on horse saddle pads. They were very squishy, kind of quilted foam pads, right? But total, they're about 3/4 of an inch thick. So when it was time to turn around that little patch, the 2mm hover, the usual in the middle here, would not have been enough. It would have still, the foot would have still compressed the foam pad. And it would have been harder to turn, and it may have twisted the thread the wrong way. So we went to the full hover for that. It was awesome. It totally worked. So for regular projects, you go here. And so you choose whether you want hover or not. If you don't want hover, you use the first option. Personally, I grew up before the hover. I am used to the freehand system. I use it for everything. So I don't use the hover myself most of the time. There are times I will use it, like sewing around patches, anything around a square, it's awesome. But I'm trained to the freehand system, so I use it a lot. But if you are used to the hover, then make sure you have the second option selected. Then the other option, if you want to use the hover, is this one here, the foot up and down. This is tied to the button on the front of your machine near the needle. When you go there, you can select the height of the hover. And we've noticed, again, Debbie Cacciamani tested with this, the foot height on the 7 and 8 series, because they're bigger machine heads, there's room in there, there's a sensor that knows how high the foot is. But it knows exactly the height of the foot. So this 2 millimeter will work pretty well. Now, if you're using this on a project that is thicker, let's say you're sewing with polar fleece and it's double-sided and it's pretty thick, the 2 millimeter hover may squish that fleece down even when the foot retracts. So you may want to go to 4 millimeters. You can change this anytime to suit your project. You are not tied down to one number. And if you changed it and you come back, you can reset to the default. 5 series owners, 570s, 590s, make a note. We found that if you move this up to 3 millimeters, it tends to work across all scenarios, where the 2 millimeters sometimes is a little snug on the base. So we found from experience, and this is where, based on what you work on, if you work just with thin layers, 2 is enough, but we found that 3 work with all scenarios. So you may want to tweak yours. That will be what we call tips from the road, things we learned along the way. All right, let's go back to the camera. It keeps doing this. All right. So my questions are here. Let's see, what time is it? Okay, we're doing good. Yeah. Okay, what is the normal presser foot pressure? And this lady has look, nice sewing room. A 790, a 590, so 7 series. 5 series is a little smaller head, and the 7 and 8 series are taller as well, right? So there's actually, if you lift the foot up on a 7 series and 8 series, I can pass my hand, and I have an average man's large size gloves, right? So I have an average size hand. I can pass my whole hand under the foot. On a 5 series, not quite. It's a smaller machine. It does not quite as much height. They're both sufficient. It's just there's a bit of difference between the two. And an 830. So the 7 and 8 series will be the same. The 5, not quite as high. So on the, well, let's go back. My camera operator, Randy, today is having to go back and forth a lot, which is cool. All right, let's go back to the screen. Okay, so on the right of your screen here, on all those series, you have the presser foot pressure. Those are like the little brass weights on top, for the scales, for the pharmacists, right? On top of the presser foot. So when you go there, notice on a 7 series, the scale is 50 as the starting point. On a 5 series, the scale is 70. It's the same result, but it's a different scale. So don't compare your machines. Just start with the number that your machines, that particular machines. And if you have both a 7 and 8 and 5 series, when you see 50 to start, remember when you do those cross seams on quilt piecing, if you want to reduce the foot pressure by half, you go down to 25. If you're on a 5 series that defaults at 70, I'll go down to 35. I'll reduce it by half. So I really work with the one. I work with a lot of machines. I don't argue with them. If it says your default is, I think on an Aurora, I think it was 47 or something like that. So each generation or series of machine is slightly different that way. So start with the default the way it is, and then you can go from there as a percentage if you want. So that would work. And also, since you can change the presser foot pressure while you sew, you could calibrate as you test. And then when you like it, you got it. Remember, if you save a stitch in the personal program, the heart folder, it will go in with any settings, length, width, needle position, thread tension, and it will go with that. The presser foot pressure, though, affects everything you do right now. It's not just stitch specific, it's a hardware thing. So you want, if you change to a different stitch, it will stick. That one affects the whole machine. So if you had to increase presser foot pressure because you're working with chiffon and you want a good grip on that fabric, or if you're working with knits and you don't want them to stretch too much and you lighten the pressure, then for all day as you're working on that knit, it will stay lighter that way as well. So that's cool. Okay. All right. Let's go back to face cam. I should probably stay there. How many stitches do I have on my machine? I will give you part A and part 2. Part A doesn't really matter much, unless if you're running a commercial business, and you have gazillion stitches on your machine. My Bernina 830 from 2008, the launch of the 8 series, has over 12 million stitches on it, and it sews like the first day. So let's go to the simulator. I'll show you where you check that out. Then, and it's the same on all machines. You go to the settings, and because it's not something you need to see every day, right? So it's in the settings. It's a machine thing, right? The stitch count on your machine. It's a piece of information, the I on your machine, and it's going to be here. That will tell you what version of machine you have. And while we are here, a couple of things. Now, whoa, my simulator has stitched 96 stitches. It's brand new. I have a new laptop actually. So literally, I have a brand new fictional 740. So this will tell you, and the stitches since the last maintenance, okay? That way, you can keep tabs if you want to. Your technician has access to the service program on your machine, how many hours the machine has been on and all that. Not that it matters much, but they can actually keep tabs on that. Okay, so the number of stitches are there. While you are here, make a note of your software version. Basically, this is your firmware version number. And if you go to the Bernina website, bernina.com, and you go to the machine model that you have, the product information, there will be a support tab. When you go there, at the bottom of the page, there will be a button for this. There will be the owner's manual. Actually, let me show you that. Let me show you that. I'm going to show you this on the website. So let me go to the website. That would be here. Okay. So if I go to, let's say, my 880 plus. Okay. So machines. And oops, it's flickering. Da, 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 da. Oh, we're back. All right. I should have just hovered. It's supposed to. It's flickering black. The go-to-meeting, the go-to-webinar is interfering with my display. Okay. Yep. Try that again. Now my web browser is white. I shouldn't have said I'm from Canada. I'm getting snow for. All right. Well, okay. I'll have to do it verbally then. Let's go back to Facecam. Technology, gotta love it. All right. So when you go to the product page for your machine, there will be a support tab. And then when you click on the support tab, it will jump to the bottom of the page. There's two buttons. One will be the owner's manual. Download that. It's a PDF. What I like is that on a large tablet, I have a large Android tablet. If you have an iPad, it's the same thing, right? You can put the manual on there. The advantage of the PDF version, even on your computer, is that you can search for it. So let's say somebody says hover and you say, well, what's that? You could search for the word hover, where if you have to look through the manual, it takes a little longer. So I like the PDF myself. Then that's one thing. Then next to it is the second button that says a support page. When you go to the support page, you will have the latest firmware version to download, a simulator for your machine. I love the simulator. I'm using it to do this today, right? But if I get a question, or if I have a question for myself, I can go to the simulator and poke at the machine without having the machine in front of me. I like that. And with laptops now, I can actually, like if I want to try making a combination of something, in the combi mode on the sewing, I can actually practice with the simulator. I don't have to be sitting in the sewing room to do that. I can be in my comfy chair in the living room with a laptop and do it there. Okay, so you'll have the simulator, but also the firmware. You can check the firmware version on your, let me go back here. No, we stay there on the simulator. So this is your firmware version currently. Oh, sorry, we're not on the computer screen yet. It never came back. Okay, so I'll show my screen. So when you are here, so that will let you compare. If your firmware version is not current, the number on the website is bigger than what you have on the machine, you can download the firmware, put it on an empty USB stick, and then put it in. If you don't want to deal with that, at your next annual cleaning, right? Because we're all good and we have our machines cleaned every year. It's like your car. They say the best thing you can do is have it oiled every year, right? Change the oil. Same thing. And your technician, if something is slightly out of whack or threatening to be out of whack, they will fix it before it's a boo-boo, right? So that's why you want to do it regularly. Keep your machine purring. So if you don't do it yourself, your Bernina technician is tasked by Bernina to do this automatically when you bring your machine for service. if there is a newer firmware version than what you have on the machine. So then you don't have to worry about it. And to do the firmware updates, let me go back to the, let me go back here. There is, whoops, that'll be here. Let's see here. Tools, yeah, under the tools, there is an update. Now on your, don't do that today, but on your machine is your version. If you downloaded the firmware and open the files, there's on the support page, the instructions on how to do that are all there. So if you want to do it, it's great. You can do it at home. It takes about 10 minutes. So when you put a USB stick with the new firmware on the machine, when you click update, it will preemptively save all the settings that you had done in your machine, the stitches you saved, the embroidery designs, everything you tweaked. It will save that to the stick, upgrade the brains, and then go back to the stick and say, okay, give me all the user information. I can put it back on the machine. So it will preserve your customizations. Now, in case you could save all those customizations on a stick, you don't really need to do this yourself. You know, you could put this on the stick and back to the machine, but the update process nowadays does it automatically. So that's where you check the version and the stitch count on your machine. Let's go back to Facecam. Okay, all right. Oh, that's a good question that came up. And I actually, that question came up after the first session, between the first session this morning and this afternoon session. And I went and I fired up a 7 Series machine here and I tested it because I come from a research background. You know, you do stuff from memory, but then if I'm not 100% sure because I don't have a kind of a visual bookmark in my head of it, I'll go check it, okay? So I won't take my word for it. So I went to a 7 Series and I checked it. So if you grew up with, like me, with a mechanical sewing machine, when the machine was in the middle of doing a stitch and you press a quick reverse, it would instantly reverse, right? Because you were forcing basically the mechanism to shift back because of a cam throwing it. There was a mechanical throw in there that would literally make it go that way. It would reverse direction instantly. So if the needle was coming up and on the way down, the feed dog would throw down, would go backwards immediately. But on a computerized machine, it's called a pattern. The computer says, oh, a stitch is, you're going to move the needle up, you're going to move the feed dog towards the back, and then you go down. And so if you invoke and you're on the way down and the feed dog is already coming up to do the stitch and you throw the reverse, it will finish the current thing before it switches to the next stitch. It has it earmarked stitch by stitch. But you can do that what you could do on the old. So if you're not careful, if you invoke the quick reverse while stitching, sometimes you get an extra stitch. You're not getting an extra stitch. The machine is finishing the current stitch at the moment you invoked the reverse. I don't like that answer either. So to prevent that, here's what you do. I typically sew with the needle down anyway, right? So if you're doing decorative stitch and you want to finish at a certain point and you don't want that extra stitch when you reverse, even with a straight stitch, let's say, to secure it, then sew. And then when you get close, tiptoe, go one stitch at a time until it will stop down. Even if the needle stops up, the key here is stop, dead. Then press the quick reverse. Then as soon as it starts sewing, it will be in reverse. You will not get the extra stitch. So to get on the dot, begin reversing here, control, pause, stop sewing, press the quick reverse, then sew backwards, then reverse, and then it will do it. Think of it as if you're driving a car, you're moving forward and you try to put it in reverse while you're still moving, it may take a half a second before the car actually reverses. It won't sound good either. It's similar to that. You need to just finish the last stitch that was where you want to be, and then invoke the quick reverse. It will start reversing from there. And that worked every time. It works in both directions. You're reversing, and I often start stitching, and I tiptoe short stitches to secure. Then I will start my straight stitch to cover that up. So you never know where those stitches were, but they are there securing the seam, right? So when I do this, when you stop, I won't get an extra stitch, because when I let go of the reverse, it will start forward right on the next stitch. You're good to go. Because when the needle is down, the feed dog is down. And so if you say, all right, stop there, now let's do reverse, then the machine goes, okay, when the feed dog comes up, you're in reverse already. So there is no extra stitch, okay? But remember, the machine is doing the right thing. It's just a different way of thinking that we didn't have when we used mechanical machines. And I had to basically go back. I used to do this and I said, why am I getting a stitch? And then I realized I had to stop and then engage reverse. Okay, that's for that. Do we have additional questions?
Is there a different foot for spiking that can also be used for new the 73 foot is open but not
No. Okay. Is there is there an open sole, like with a break in the sole, like like an open toe roller work foot? No, for a good reason. It would at the edge of those toes, where depending where they end. So if they end here, when you go against the ruler, they would give you a funky angle. You would not get a perfect round 360. So as you go around the shape of a ruler, your proximity and your glide would vary. It would not be perfectly consistent. So at this point, we don't have one. The opening would have to be pretty small in order to maintain that perfect circle that maintains the glide and the feel against the ruler, because you rely on that to follow your ruler, right? To maintain that evenness in all directions, coming in around all directions, the 360, you need a 360. So, and also the ruler needs to be a certain height so that the base of the foot, so that the ruler will foot rather, yeah, so that it never gets under the ruler. So the toes for now are closed. Now we do have, if it's for the thread, to pass the thread, because right now you have to thread the foot first, right? Pass the thread through, and then reattach the foot, and then start stitching. Well, it's always based on feedback. Bernina used to write on the brochures. I've said that many times. We reserve the right to make changes in the name of technical progress. The ruler foot number 72 or 96 for that matter are very good. But people said, we want it adjustable. Okay, that's great. And then we want more. They said, well, I want to be able to pass the thread through the foot so I don't have to always play with take the foot off and thread the foot and put it back on. So they made a tiny slit in the sole, in the ring, so that you can now pass your threads. So if the thread breaks and all that, it's seconds to get restarted. You don't have to rethread your foot. So it's called 72S4 slit. And then that is the new version of the foot. So if you have a 72, yes, it doesn't have a slit, but they took feedback from a few years, and then Bernina continuously improves on the product. And of course, if you have the old one, well, you got to use it. But now, based on that feedback, kudos to the product developers at Bernina. They take the feedback and then they continuously refine the equipment so that it will take that feedback into account. Okay, we are at the 4 o'clock, a little past mark. So we will stop here. There will be a recording of this video, either the morning or the afternoon session, depends on which one, on bernina.com. What you do is you go to Learn and Create, then you go to Webinars, and there'll be a link there for recorded webinars, and it will also be put on YouTube. So by next week, it takes a while to compile the files. So by next week, look for it. It'll be there if you need to see it again. And hopefully we'll do this again. To me, this is fun because it's a smorgasbord. It's a lot of variety, and it keeps me on my toes. So anyway, I wish you happy sewing. Best of luck and best of fun with your Bernina. I call mine my serious toys and my serious tools, and I just love working with them. So hope you get to enjoy yours as well, and we'll see you next time.